All right, so good morning. We have Anwen here with us, and she has agreed to give us a few words on the college admissions process and how she was able to tackle that so successfully last year. And Anwen is a incoming freshman in University of Berkeley. She was also accepted in several other schools, and she's going to tell us all about it herself. But before we begin, I do want to thank her for deciding to spend some time with us today. I know it's summer, and she has some plans to travel and meet friends and just live life before college. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And again, the intention behind this is for you to kind of give your fellow teenagers a few words of advice on how they can approach the entire process, how not to be stressed out, and maybe how you were able to tackle this so successfully. And I had the privilege to know Anwen and work with her. And, every time when we met, she was always prepared and very calm, and she was able to really hold on to her fears and never give away all of her stress. But I'm pretty sure that she has something to share with us today that made her at sometimes probably jittery and uncomfortable, or maybe super excited. I don't know. Okay, so Anwen, can you tell us, how did you feel about this whole process last year? What were some of your fears, and how were you able to tackle this? Give us a little bit of a snippet of your life, from last year, from last summer, maybe until you got some of your acceptances.
Yeah, sure. So I started doing like college prep, I would say summer before senior year. I probably should have maybe started a little earlier, but that was when I actually started. And I started with writing the Common App essay, which is like the essay you send to almost all schools. And then like from summer all the way to January 5, 6, something like that was my last deadline, is when I was writing the supplements and things like that. In terms of like struggles or fears, I think the biggest thing was when I looked at my peers, I really felt like inadequate, especially competing for these schools. And I come from a relatively, I would say, competitive high school. So I think, a lot of people were going for the same schools I was going for. And when I looked at the people around me, they were like president of 5 clubs, they were doing Olympiads and all these things. And when I looked at myself, I wasn't really involved in that many organizations. So that was like my biggest fear, especially applying for these schools. I don't think I really overcame like this fear entirely, but what I tried to do was kind of just play to my own strengths. I knew I could not talk about being the president of 5 clubs, but what I could talk about was how I developed like 2 very specific passions. Even if it wasn't 10 billion things I was doing, I was really into art and statistics specifically. And both of these things I pursued consistently over time and had multiple examples. So I think what I was able to do was kind of focus on those 2 things and really brand myself as someone who, when she's interested in something, she really puts in her all, and she's not, chasing after a bunch of things, but when she does like something, she really does give the dedication. So I think that was like kind of how I maybe tackled it, despite feeling like I might have lacked in other areas.
Yes, and what I just now hear you say, these are, I think, few keywords here. So what I just now heard you say is branding yourself, which is what really in many ways, the applications and the entire process looks like. Kind of, and another thing you just now said was playing up to my strengths, which is, what everyone should really be encouraged to do. Try to find out, what it is that you're strong at and what it is that you're good at. So playing to your strengths and branding yourself. And you also mentioned that you had art and you were really good at it, and I'm a witness of that. So I don't want to, forget to mention where everyone can find some of your art and take a look and see what you have done. So you can tell us that maybe toward the end, where can they go and visit you? But before that, how were you able to merge these 2 areas that feel seemingly different? So art and then statistics. What is it that you found common between these two, and how were you able to merge it?
This is actually something that we spent a lot of time, I guess, thinking of because, as you mentioned, art and statistics are kind of polar opposites, at least at first glance. One is, STEM and the other one is not. For me, I think the first intersection I had was I ended up doing a lot of graphic design work for statistical conferences and companies. And I did this even, I guess, before I was really interested in statistics. So it was almost like just a perfect coincidence that I ended up doing that work. But that was something I could talk about how, I used art to kind of fuel my interest and also help out in this community. And another thing that I kind of looked into as like an interest was data visualization and how to present data. And that kind of blended perfectly like statistics and art because it was using art to kind of convey like statistical ideas. So I did talk about like making graphs for my statistical projects and things like that. The last one was, I guess, a little more kind of like hidden connection that we kind of talked about, which was how both fields were about like finding patterns and bringing little pieces together to kind of reach some destination. For art, it was like bringing in shades and all these values to create a piece. And for statistics, it was looking at all these little bits of data and, doing some processes, running some code, get a conclusion. And so something I talked about a lot was how I found like this satisfaction in pattern finding in both art and statistics. And that kind of helped me, talk about both interests in like a single essay or a few essays.
I remember exemplifying your attention to detail, and these are all qualities that are super important for any STEM major, and especially anything that has to do with mathematics, which is what data science is essentially. So you just mentioned that you really were able to look and think about the major that you want to pursue and then looking at what it is that you bring to the table. But I remember asking you many times last summer, so do you want to add another major and why exactly data science? And I was kind of drilling it to make sure that you really are very much interested in this and it's not just a major. You're kind of, although I know nothing with you was frivolous, but that you were just, picking and choosing, and it was not something you deep inside you wanted yourself. So I remember asking you that many times in different ways, and every time you said yes, that's what I want to do. So how did you come to that conclusion? Because there are a lot of students that are struggling to find out what is it that they should apply and their major, and they're not very sure, and many of them actually are good at music or art like yourself, but they think, well, that's art. I mean, that doesn't really relate anything to, data science or computer science. So how are you able to arrive to your major and be so sure and so certain about it?
I would say like a big influence for me was probably my mom, since she's a statistician. So for me, in school, we don't learn statistics until senior year, which is when we should learn it, I guess. And like, if you follow the normal path, for me was like, I would not have experienced it until senior year if I had followed that path. But I had kind of gone out of the way after hearing my mom kind of discuss the field and everything to find like projects early on. So I think I did my first statistical project sophomore or junior year, something like that. I did like a little research study with the professor. And I think starting early really helped me because it kind of like I was able to like dip my toes in that water, and I found it to be pretty interesting. And, I had a lot of time left because I wasn't starting, say, senior year and getting interested. So over the next few years, I was able to pursue more opportunities and kind of do other projects. And something about statistics that I really liked was that it was very applicable to many things, even though my mom does like medical statistics. So that's kind of what I grew up hearing about. But my studies, I did one that was more related to finance and doing like statistics on finance and stuff like that. And that was really interesting. So I was able to explore like these different facets within this one larger field that I was interested, which I think was helpful. But I think the biggest thing is just getting like the hands-on experience and really seeking out like different opportunities where I could test out statistics and see if I liked it, and really like experiencing it outside of a classroom, I would say, is what helped me really like gain my interest in the field.
Yeah, so I guess a message here for anyone that might be willing to pursue that major is to start early and, like you said, dip your toes into what it is that you might want to pursue later on. And if you do not know what you would like to pursue, then you might want to dip your toes in a few different areas and explore early on, so you do not have to make that determination, in your senior year, which is a little too late. And I know a lot of students, just like you said, because of the way the school has arranged the curriculum, and sometimes you don't even have a choice of, the classes you have to take, and you have to ask for permission, you have to apply ahead of time, etc. It becomes a little difficult. So, exploring these on your own outside of the classroom can be very beneficial, and that can add a lot of pressure sometimes to do a whole bunch of things outside of school, and do school outside of school, and do school at home. So how did you manage? I know you took a good load of AP classes, so maybe you can tell us about your APs and how did you manage this load of work, and the stress. Maybe how did you stay organized?
Yeah, so in total, I think I did 10 APs over like 3 years of high school, since I didn't take any my first year. For me, like, if I'm being honest, I think the biggest thing was that I was not doing like sports and things. I know people who do sports end up having to attend practices and things like that. So kind of by default, I did have maybe like a little more time than other people to do work. But I think the main thing is just setting like goals and setting like kind of rigid boundaries for myself. So for example, like one small detail is I always held myself accountable to kind of like an 11 p.m. bedtime. I like never went past that. And I know that like a lot of people, maybe with sports practices and things like that, it might not be practical, but for me at least, kind of knowing that I have this like set deadline that I need to finish things by really helped me kind of stay motivated to like finish my work. I think a lot of it is really just about like self-control and holding yourself accountable. If you know that, you need to get things done, then I think it's important to really drill it into your mind to try to get things done, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to finish it anyways. So I think it's best to just start early and get it over with rather than dragging it on and procrastinating and things like that.
Sounds really, really good. But it's not always possible. I mean, did you not have nights when you stayed past 11? And how did you keep yourself accountable? I kind of want to get some tips even from myself, because I'm having to keep myself accountable. And many times I slip way past, my accountability, due date and deadline. And I know that I'm slipping. And I know the hardest thing is to actually keep yourself accountable. So did you have an alarm? Did you have a schedule? Did you let somebody kind of remind you, or how did you do it? Who was, or what was the catalyst there?
I guess like I don't think a lot of people will follow this one because it's kind of super specific, but something that like I had was my dad would turn off our Wi-Fi every night at 11. So except for on like my work computer. And even though at first I think this was definitely like super irritating to me because who wants that to happen? Looking back on it, I think it actually really helps me because I wasn't on my phone. I knew, I had this 11 p.m. thing. Obviously, sometimes I had to go over, but I could always use my work computer, but it kind of eliminated all the distractions. So I think setting things like that helps. And during the actual application process, something that I did was I would like forcefully almost schedule meetings consistently, because if I had a meeting next week with like Ava, for example, then I knew, I had to turn in drafts. I had to have something to show. So even though sometimes, I would be procrastinating, I would really like schedule that meeting. That way it's on my calendar and I know like, okay, this in 3 days, you do have to have a draft. And that would kind of keep me going to finish my work. So I think just setting like reminders and I guess just reminding yourself that you have work to do and that, you have a deadline, I think is helpful.
Yeah, and this is really, really helpful. Yes, I knew that there must be someone involved here in this whole process a little bit, even though it was kind of annoying, like you said, I can tell. Many students might be listening and thinking, no way. I'm just going to be so upset at that. So, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. So can you tell us a little bit about, and, feel free to to tell us if you're not, or maybe you want to give us some personal tips if you'd like to, but I do want to hear something about the stress that happens in high school that is a borderline anxiety and, mental health related stress, if you have observed that with your peers, or how are the high school students, and I know this is kind of general, but handling that? How do you think, from your perspective, what is it that we adults maybe can do? I've been hearing all kinds of stories about high school students really struggling with mental health and feeling heard and feeling understood, and letting their voice be out there and taken seriously. So did you observe anything like that?
Yeah.
And what was your suggestion, if any?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned before, my high school was like pretty academically competitive. So everywhere around me, people were applying to, all these elite institutions. Everyone was like cramming for tests. At my school, it's not uncommon at all for everyone to just be super stressed about their grades, if it slips to a B or something like that. So I definitely saw a lot of that. I don't know if I have any like personal tips, but I think something that would have helped is just, having people establish this idea that it's not the end of the world if you get a B or something. And I think that you can see that even in college admissions. I definitely grew up believing that, in order to go to great schools, you had to be like this perfect student, you couldn't have any flaws, everything had to be perfect. But after actually going through the process and seeing not just my results, but the results of people around me, I've come to realize that I think a lot of it, I wouldn't say is like random, but there's a lot of like unexpected results. You have people that you might not consider to be like this perfect 100% student getting into these great schools. And I think it really goes to show that it's not all just about like your numbers. And that there are just so many facets of yourself that you can highlight beyond just like your grades and things like that, and that it's important to really try to come off as someone with a lot of passion about the things that they're interested, rather than just someone who is like a straight A student, perfect in every way. So I think it's okay to not be like perfect, and it doesn't really determine anything in terms of like college admission.
Yeah, the colleges really are looking at personality as well, and no one is just a number. So the academic portion is just one side of the application, one little, I should say, 1/4 of the profile of the student. And then there's a lot of other things that come in. Personality plays a big role. And I know that you were able to explain in your PIQs for the UCs, and then in your personal statement and some of your supplemental essays very well. You were able to articulate all of your passions related to art. And I know that you're an excellent cook, and you wrote about prepping meals for your brother, which was pretty amazing. Pretty amazing to me as someone who works with high school students, because that's not everyone, even as adults, sometimes we really struggle prepping up a wholesome meal. So I know you were describing some of your preps, and those sounded so good to me personally. So can you tell us a little more about your hobbies and passions, and what is it that you described in your writing that shaped up your profile? So we see already the academics that you brought to the table with your 10 APs and obviously very good grades, but what was the rest of the profile like? What else did you exemplify about yourself?
So this was kind of like a misconception I had when I was entering. I thought, I didn't think I would ever be talking about like what Ava mentioned. I didn't think I would be talking about making bento boxes for my brother, or trying to make croissants, but I ended up talking about a lot of like quirky, I guess, smaller aspects of who I was that I kind of discovered kind of helped me brand myself. So for example, the meal prep, I used a lot of that type of thing to talk about how, I really care a lot for people around me, and I really enjoy meticulous kind of attention to detail, all these little things. And so cooking was like a big passion that I discussed, even though it was not related to my major or anything. I used it to kind of display like the type of character that I am. Some other things I talked about were Chinese calligraphy. I do a lot of Chinese calligraphy and Chinese brush painting. And I thought that this interest kind of is something that I've pursued since childhood. And I never thought I would be saying it to colleges. And I've never really even considered it to be a significant passion. But when I came to think of it, it was something that I did every week, and I used it to connect with my family, my heritage. And it was something that, again, I think showed just that I really enjoy like having these kind of like deep personal bonds with people. I really enjoyed sharing my calligraphy with my grandparents, for example. And so I talked about how, I do all these things, and even though they're not academic, even though they're not, competitive level even, they're just things that I really like to do in order to show that I care for people. And this was like a part of my personality that I thought was important for me to display, to kind of just show like the type of person I was, beyond academics and things like that.
Yeah, I remember uh, one of the calligraphy one and the grandparents. That was one of my personal favorite stories. And yes, making the bento box for your brother. And also, I remember the one mention, the kind of friend that you are, remember? So that is also part of your personality that is really important to show. So for anyone that is watching this, there's really no limits as to how deep you can go into exemplifying your family life and yourself and your personality, and how do you interact with people around you? What kind of friend are you? What kind of a big brother or sister, or younger brother or sister are you? So it does not always have to be limited to competitions and Olympiads, although that's important, but that is not you entirely. There's a lot more to everyone's personality. So can you give some ideas or some tips or anything that you might want to just kind of like suggestions for someone who has been through it? You're on the other side of the fire ring and you're successful now because you're probably already shopping for college. So can you give some tips to those who are just starting out?
The biggest thing is obviously to start early and really just like get the train going, because if you wait, I think you'll find that it's just like 10 times harder and you just have so much more work. Something that I wish I probably did a little more thoroughly is kind of proactive research on schools. So obviously everyone looks at the school website, everyone reads, department descriptions and things like that. But I think something I wish I had done a little more of was to kind of go out of my way to find more information, whether it be attending like the webinars that a lot of schools host, or going on a tour, or even trying to talk to like current students. I think it would have helped me get kind of a more unique insider look at a school versus just this website that, everyone is reading, everyone's going to use for their essays. But beyond just like the logistical side of things, I think talking about what you really enjoy is really important, because for me, even though, like making croissants, for example, is something that, I never thought I would be displaying, or for example, I really enjoy reading like Wikipedia pages. I never thought I would be talking about that. But I found that when I wrote about those things versus if I wrote about something that I had no interest in whatsoever, but thought would really look good on the application, I had a lot more like feeling. And I think it came off a lot more kind of genuine, that I really enjoyed doing these things. And I think it's important to really show that side of you rather than trying to go for what you think should be on there. Especially because if you think about it, everyone probably thinks they should say the same thing. And so there's going to be a bunch of people who say the same thing to all these schools. So if you try to approach it from a unique angle, I think it'll be really helpful.
Excellent advice. You kind of second what I always preach out there. You start early and do your research. And yeah, thank you for that. So I know you were accepted to a whole bunch of schools, and at the top two that at the end, after looking at all of your acceptances, I think it boiled down to Johns Hopkins and Berkeley. Am I right?
Yeah,
Is
that's
that what it was? Okay. So how did you decide on Berkeley versus Johns Hopkins? What was your kind of logic behind it? So maybe somebody else is debating the same topic right now. So
yeah. So I ended up just deciding between two schools essentially. For, I would say, majority of the time, I really wanted to go to Hopkins. I was leaning toward Hopkins. But as I kind of took a step back and just looked at the schools and really, looked at what I wanted from each school, I think I started to lean more toward Berkeley. I think the biggest thing was I was looking at what I wanted to do. So as I mentioned before, I've kind of always stuck to statistics. I've always wanted to go into that field. And when I looked at the programs, it kind of became clear that there was significant difference. So for example, I looked at the program at Hopkins, And it was not, they don't have a specific statistics major, but they have applied math and statistics. So to begin with, it kind of was adding like a little thing to what I wanted to do. And when I looked at the program, it's a very small program at that school. And in fact, a lot of people use it as a double major or minor rather than just like their full-on major. So I think it was pretty clear to me that, you know, that program versus Berkeley's program, which is a lot larger, it probably would be, I wouldn't say like underdeveloped, but maybe in comparison, Berkeley's would be a little more robust. And on top of that, when I looked at the schools, Berkeley obviously is renowned for, you know, data science, computer science, statistics, all three of them, it is very renowned for, versus Hopkins. Obviously, all their programs are great, but something that they're really known for is like medical school, pre-med. And when I thought about it, I realized that, you know, at Berkeley, I had kind of so many programs that I could potentially go into and that, you know, are big kind of focuses of the school, versus at Hopkins, a lot of people are pursuing pre-med and their medical school is amazing, but I never had that on my plate. I never wanted to do medical school or anything. So if I went to that school, I knew that, you know, I'd be surrounded by a lot of pre-meds. There's nothing wrong with that, but the school has kind of an obvious focus on one area. And so, you know, the three programs I mentioned, like data science, computer science, statistics, at Hopkins, it obviously would not be this big highlight, versus at Berkeley, it is a big highlight. So that was probably the biggest thing. The other thing was obviously tuition cost, which I think is important to consider, especially when I looked at the two schools, and at best they were, you know, equal in level in terms of program. So, you know, I thought about, is it worth it to spend double the tuition to send myself all the way to Johns Hopkins when I can get equivalent education for half the price? The last thing that I considered was location. So I originally really wanted to go to Hopkins and I wanted to experience the East Coast and big city and everything. But when I, you know, visited, like if I'm being honest, I just realized that I didn't really like the environment. It didn't really have the things I grew up with, like Asian food, boba, you know, it was just a very different environment. And for me personally, I preferred Berkeley's environment, which was close to home, you know, had a lot of things that I grew up loving. And I just felt like, you know, it was like a bonus to the school.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes students really underestimate the environment, and the environment will be very important because you need to be happy and comfortable. And, you know, transitioning already to a freshman year in college with all the expectations, the new everything, expectations on you, the new classes, just, you know, the part of exiting your nest, sort of, so to speak, and getting that rite of passage and moving on, that itself is huge jump. And then to find yourself in an environment where you feel like you don't belong, or it takes you too long to accustom to, that might not be, you know, the best thing for everyone, depending a lot on, you know, the students. So it's good to know yourself. It's good to really know what makes you happy, what makes you comfortable, what is your personality like, and, you know, kind of what makes you tick. So this has been wonderful. I do want to ask you, can you share with us where can anyone viewing this see your art, and what else can and you write, and you used to write for your school's newspaper or news magazine, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your art. Where can we find that? Are you pursuing that this summer, or are you just, you know, relaxing now? What's going on?
So I have a website, which is just my full name, anwenhuang.com, and that has a lot of my artwork. It does have my journalism, but it hasn't, if I'm being honest, it has not been updated recently. So my complete journalism work can be found at lhsepic.com. And if you go to staff and find my name, you'll find all the articles that I've written. And this summer, I've been kind of taking it easy and relaxing, which I think it's good to have a break every once in a while. So I have not been actively really pursuing much, just hanging out with friends and going on trips and things like that.
As you should, yes. So would you like to read for us any of your essays, or a snippet even will be, I think, great. Sort of like a final note. We can end on a high note. if you would like to share.
Yeah, sure. Should I find like a UC PIQ or?
It's entirely up to you. A UC PIQ might be fitting because you're attending UC Berkeley.
Mhm.
So that might be something that everyone might be curious to hear.
Sure, yeah. Let me just give me 1 second so I can find it.
Sure. And for those of you who did not catch exactly the name, I will have it listed at the end in the footnotes here in this video website where Anwen's art could be found, and a few other links where some of her writing can be found as well. And while she's still looking for her PIQ, I do want to say that I had invited Anwen to join me to edit one of the books that I'm working on, and she has graciously agreed. So when she comes back from her break, I'm looking forward to how I can cooperate with her and see if I can actually have this book ready this summer for anybody who is looking to get a little more tips and advice on how to get into the UC system of California. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I have one PIQ here, which is answering the question, what would you say is your greatest talent or skill? How have you developed and demonstrated that talent over time? My sights on 2 prestigious colored pencils contests. I spent months breaking down duck wings and turtle shells into minute pigment layers to create portraits that were anatomically accurate yet vibrant and surreal. When my pieces won and were published in nationally distributed publications, understood that my methodical approach and diligence toward crafting each detail had paid off. I take pride in achieving my goals through such perseverance. When I embark on anything, I'm able to break it down into small steps and ensure that each one is completed to the utmost quality. Each birthday, my friends receive personalized mementos like Andy Warhol portraits, intricate collages, and scrumptious baked goods from me. I work for months planning and hand making the individual elements of their presents. And when I hear how I've helped people feel recognized, my persistent work becomes all the more meaningful. When I'm not crafting gifts, I'm stargazing or binge watching Cosmos: A Space-Time Odyssey. Forever scribbling Saturn drawings as a kid, I had always dreamed of seeing the planet's rings through a powerful telescope. When my schools didn't offer astronomy courses, I researched programs that would provide a hands-on experience. I allocated time to study for the necessary qualifications and finally was accepted to an intensive astronomy camp at UC Santa Cruz. There, peering into a massive telescope for the first time, I cried seeing the delicate rings. But every stargazing session needs a warm snack. A carbaholic, I dedicated the summer of 2019 to perfecting the art of the croissant. Naively believing my brownie expertise spelled success, I was crushed when my first croissants came out unproofed and dense. But unwavering, I researched the tricks for mastering each aspect of the treat and practiced layering dough and tempering butter. After many flour-covered afternoons, my croissants came out perfectly fluffy. Breaking down every goal I have and persistently reaching it over time is a skill I've continually demonstrated. Whether I'm devising another ornate present or investigating Jupiter's moons, I'll always have the foresight to plan a process and the grit to take it on.
Bravo. Thank you for that treat. All right, so it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for spending the time and offering all these tips and kind of giving us your personal insight into this process. Any last words for kind of like a wish for yourself, for your future? Anything that you might have sort of put online for yourself as I'm going to aim for this in the next couple of years, or just a personal wish or anything as a last word?
Yeah, I guess like for me, I think I've grown a lot in the college application process. I think I've understood that it's important to really understand like who you are, what you like, and to really try to go for that rather than going for kind of these ideals that have been set for, I'm sure, all of us at some point in time. So I think my wish for myself is to really find what I want to do, because even though I want to do statistics, I haven't decided what specific area. So to kind of find my passion in the field and I guess just have fun, like exploring all the opportunities that college has to offer and really, I guess, just achieving my goal of becoming a statistician.
Excellent. And we wish you that and a lot more. So I'm very, very excited to see what your future holds and, all of your achievements from now on. So keep it going, keep making us proud. And thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your summer and happy hiking in Yosemite, was it? Or
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone. All right. And I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you so much for the
Okay,
opportunity.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.